Franchise Secrets, Eric Von Horn.
If you're not a part of the Franchise Secrets Facebook group, what are you waiting for? It's franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. I cannot believe how valuable this group turned out to be. When someone asks a question, the feedback is honest, authentic, very helpful, and it's from multiple perspectives. If you're not sure that you're getting the most accurate information about franchising, then check out the largest, most helpful Facebook group in all of franchising. Whether you're a Z, a ZOR, a buyer, or investor, join our free Facebook group at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. All right, Franchise Secrets, Allan Young, franchisor that had a massive exit, has a new brand on the horizon that is not ready to launch yet. So we got into his book, Disruptible: Break Away from Ordinary. We start out with him talking about how fell out of the sky, basically 50 feet down, crashed, couldn't feel his legs, and then just that whole process and what happened next. He's got this book where we talked about like reframing adversity, embracing your fears. It's okay not to be normal. We also talked about the number one reason Z's and Zors fail. How to eject your friends and how to get good at it. Like how to get rid of the people in your life that are dragging you down and not adding any value. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode with Allan Young. Allan, good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Eric.
So you got a new book called Disruptible: Break Away from Ordinary. You got so many like good nuggets in there and things that we can talk about. We are going to talk about them. But like you told me the story of you breaking some bones, falling out of the sky. I want to start there.
Sure.
Because that's a good story. I'm sure it wasn't good living through that, but tell us that story.
Yeah, it was actually, it was great living through it. Painful, but I'd written the book all the way up to the conclusion. So this made for a perfect conclusion of the book. It is a interesting story. I think it's a fun story because what I learned from it. And what's interesting is I was able to take all the things I've written in the book and use them in my recovery. And that's what the conclusion's all about, is my recovery from falling 50 feet from the sky, paragliding, breaking my back, becoming paralyzed, not being able to walk at all. And then rebuilding back, 6 to 8 months later, I was walking again. Under a year later, I went on a 8-mile backpacking trip with my son with 50 pounds on my back. So I used all the things in the book to get there.
All right. So let's unpack just a little bit of that story, because you told me the story at length. I saw the video and it was impactful to me. So let's do it the point when you knew that you were falling out of the sky and then you couldn't move your legs.
Yeah. So, I was paragliding in Virginia. I got into paragliding before the pandemic, but I started paragliding even more during the pandemic. There wasn't a lot to do. And I was up in Virginia with my family, and, I was power paragliding at the moment. I did both paragliding off of mountains, but power paragliding, you have a 50-pound fan motor strapped to your back and you literally run into the sky and fly around. So it's an amazing feeling. I talk a lot about the book. I'm a huge believer in getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's one of the ways I practice it. Also do free diving, ice baths, all that stuff that, that we all do to physically get out of our comfort zone, because I think that's helpful. It's something very intentional we can do. It's a controlled environment. And I went through 10 days of training to learn how to paraglide. So lots of hours, lots of practice. I was probably on my 70th flight, and I got a little bit too comfortable and very comfortable in doing what I was doing, but I wasn't quite an expert. And I took off in an area, a very small beach in Virginia, on the Potomac River. So it was probably about 60, 70 feet wide, very narrow. The wind happened to be blowing the right direction. I decided to do it. There's power lines to my left, water to my right. I figured I could do it, and I took off great, great flight. I took off at the base of probably a 75-foot tree. And my plan was, you have to land back into the wind, was to come over this tree and land further down the beach. And as I was coming in, I took a change to my plan, which was, hey, if I just go to the right of this tree and land, I'll be where I was before. I don't have to carry this 50-foot motor, way back to the car. I get to land near my son and my sister and my nephew, who happened to be there at the time. And I was literally, as I was coming into land, I was focused on the landing, where I was going to land, and thinking about, breakfast, what I was going to do with the family that day. And all of a sudden I felt this jerk. And what happened was the wind shifted and blew me into this tree. The left edge of the wing caught onto the tree, and I started immediately swinging around, and right in front of me were power lines. So there's two things they teach you not to do ever in paragliding, which is, one is avoid power lines at all costs. Hitting those is bad enough to hit something in the air, but when you fall down, if your wing is touching the power lines and you're touching the ground, which the size of the wing, that's probably going to be the case, then you become a conduit for all that electricity going into the ground. So my instant reaction, it happened, well under a second. It was a split decision, very fast decision. As I'm looking at these things, I broke the second rule, which is never, the brakes are what you steer with. Never bring the brakes below your shoulders, because if you do, the wing collapses. So I decided to break rule number rule number two. So I didn't break rule number one. Seemed like a good decision at the time, and it was. But I fell about 50 feet, skidded in right before the power lines. My wing went like inches below it. But part of that was I broke my back, and I did not go unconscious. I was very conscious when I landed and couldn't feel my legs. My son comes running over, "Are you okay?" And my first words out of my mouth are, "I can't feel my legs," which is a very weird sensation, as you can probably imagine, to not feel them. And if you can't feel them, you can't move them. Waited about 45 minutes for the ambulance to come. It was another hour ride to the nearest hospital. I was lucky enough, one of the neurosurgeons from Walter Reed happened to be on call at that hospital, and he had a lot of experience with traumatic spinal injuries, and fixed me back up. But I woke up in the hospital, and still I could feel my right leg a little bit and moved that a little bit, but my left leg was non-responsive.
What did the doctor, so it had been like emotional, or just a flood of like thoughts and emotion when you're sitting on the ground and you can't feel your legs. Like, what was going through your head at that point, knowing you just fell and you can't feel your legs?
Yeah, it was a strange reaction, because I just come off this great flight, and I love flying. It's one of those places, both freediving and paragliding is one of those places where there really is no stress. It's a huge stress relief, and that lasts. There's a half-life to that when you get off the back on the ground. This amazing flight. I love flying, and my first thought was, "Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this again. I'm not going to be able to walk again." I figured, I can deal with that, but it was not flying again was my first reaction. And that really is what motivated me through my recovery, was a desire to get back up in the air again.
So you're at the hospital, you're having feeling coming back into one leg, the other leg is non-responsive. What are the doctors telling you?
Yeah, he kept coming in every, 6 hours, checking in on me. Different spinal surgeons were coming in, and I of course asked the question, is this going to be permanent? And I got the standard, we don't know. Spinal injuries are really complicated. You never really know. You might not walk again. They kind of hedge the bet, because they don't want to make any promises.
What do you think they knew at that time? Looking back, what did you think the real answer was?
I really don't think they know, which is why they're being careful. And of course, there's malpractice insurance, all that kind of jazz. One of my really good friends is a base jumper. He literally climbs mountains like the Matterhorn, Mont Blanc, and gets to the top. And he's a professional skier. He skis off the top of it and base jumps. And he had an accident probably about 2 years before that, where, at 10,000 feet, he hit the side of a granite mountainside, broke his femur, his head was crushed, and he went unconscious, and they thought he was dead. He just drifted down. It took him a couple of minutes to get down to the ground. I think it was maybe 5 minutes, and landed in some trees, and they thought he was dead. A year later, he's doing that same climb and jumping off that same mountain. So I called him from the hospital room. And by the way, I was selling my company at the time. The next day, I was
That's right. Yeah. Like literally selling a big franchisor, like a big brand.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I could do it from the hospital bed. I was on Zoom calls. If you're ever going to break your back, here's my tip: do it during a pandemic. I didn't miss anything. By the time I could walk again was right about the time where people were going out and doing stuff. But he gave me really good advice. He said, the one question you need to ask the doctors is everything technically correct? And so in this case, is the spine put back in the right places? I had a bunch of screws in there. Is the spinal cord, not impeded or pinched or anything? And the answer is yes. And he said, if the answer is yes, then you can recover. Absolutely. It's just going to take a lot of hard work. So I spent the next 6 months doing, I would go to PT and they would give me 5 exercises that I could do at that time. And they would say, do these 2 or 3 times. I would do them 50 times. I would just continually do that. I did hyperbaric chamber training. I did UV light therapy, cryotherapy, NAD plus injections, anything. I did, we've all probably gone to chiropractor, had those like TENS devices where it vibrates. Yep. Well, that's AC current. This is DC current, where literally you're electrocuting your legs to simulate the muscles. Not something I'd recommend doing for recreational purposes. But I don't know what worked. My whole philosophy was, I'm just going to throw everything at it and treat this like I'm training, for an Olympic sport, except my Olympic sport was walking again.
Wow. So do you still do any of that stuff? Like I got an NAD patch on my arm right now.
Yeah.
I've got an infrared sauna. I do the hyperbaric because I liked, after I had COVID really bad, I started to do that. And so are there any of those things that you still do?
Yeah, NAD plus I do. I was doing the IV where over an hour they're, putting a lot of it into you and it feels horrible. You instantly get headaches, nausea. It's a horrible feeling, and you control the speed in which it goes in you. So the faster it goes in, the worse it is. And I think my 5th treatment, I just turned it all the way up and I got it done in 30 minutes. Just because I want to get it over with. But now I do the NAD plus injections once a day. You do it in your belly. It's a small amount and it doesn't make you feel bad. And yeah, so I do that. I do a couple other injections that are really good for, your hormones, men's health, things like that. I do cryotherapy every now and then. Wish you could do more ice baths. Infrared, I don't have some of the stuff at home. So I was going in every day to one of these wellness centers that has all those things in one place. And I had the unlimited membership and did everything I possibly could. But yeah, I do some of that today.
Love it. All right. So, and then let's tell a bit, like you literally were selling your company when you were there. Then I want to transition to the book. Cause so like, when did they know? Cause you're dealing with a large company buying your company out. Like, what was that first call like? Like, hey, I'm actually in the hospital. I can't feel my legs. When should I sign? Like, what was that conversation like?
There was no conversation. They didn't know. They just sent me the DocuSign. I'm like, I was on a board call that afternoon too, and I'm still in my hospital gown. So they're looking at me going, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Well, I broke my leg. I'm paralyzed." But yeah, I just got the DocuSign. It's easy to do. Technology is pretty incredible now, where you can get all those things done, and it's not a problem.
All right, let's talk about the book, Disruptible, Break Away from Ordinary. Why write a book?
Originally I did it as a franchisor, and the idea is you write a book. I always thought about it. It was never top on my list, but it was on the bucket list. But the idea was, I got convinced to do it as a franchisor. It's a great thing to have. So if you have a franchise candidate, they get the book, they read it. There's a credibility factor to it. So I started it then.
Well, just real quick, by the way, you sold your brand, you have the book, you have another brand that is going to be launching. So you'll still be able to use that as a credibility factor, probably even more so now. We'll have you on at some point in the future to talk about brand number 2, which we've talked a bit about, and I cannot wait for that thing to launch. But so I'm like really glad that you did the book, and I think it's smart for franchisors listening to this. Like, you should have a personal brand. You probably should have a book. You should have something out there so people can get into your world and understand who you are as a leader, who you are as a franchisor, how you think, what your mindset's like, what your personality's like, and all of that stuff. So franchisors, take note of this, and you'll really like it when you see what his new brand is. But keep going on like why you wrote the book and what the book's about.
Yeah, that was my original why. And then I lost it when we decided to sell the company. And one of the things I didn't want to do is go over whether we're selling a private equity strategic. We ended up doing a strategic neighborly. But most of the time they want the founder, the CEO, to go over and spend some time on what I call the dark side. I'm extremely unemployable, having been an entrepreneur for 25 years. I don't think that would have gone well for anybody. And I wasn't a huge fan of selling the company. I had some partners and investors, and it was time to do it for them. It wasn't for me. I think, a lot of times when you sell a company, I think 70% of entrepreneurs regret selling their company in the first year. And there's a reason why someone's buying your company. It's because they, smart people have figured out when they do all their due diligence that they can make more money above and beyond and get a return on what they give you. But I wasn't super excited about it. I don't have any regrets about doing it. There's always more things to do. But I knew that I couldn't be the CEO going through that process, because I can sell a lot of things if I'm passionate about it, if I believe in it, but I just didn't believe in it. So when I stepped down, end of 2017, I'd started writing a book, but really lost my mojo on wanting to write it, because that was the purpose and the reason why I did it. So I really had to take a step back and look at, and the book did change. I think the topics that are in there, it became, things that I was a lot more passionate about. Instead of writing it for a prospective franchisee, I really wrote it for me. And my main passion, I think, was writing it for my son, who at the time was 18, getting ready to go out into the world. So it was a really long letter to him of all the things I wanted him to know. So, I got asked the question a lot of, who's your audience? And is it CEOs of companies, entrepreneurs? Who's your audience? And, I had a very simple answer. It's my son. And if it happens to be relevant for others, and I think it is, that's great. But I really wanted him to have that book, all the things I wanted to pass along to him that I think are important, that are going to help him in his journey. All the mistakes I made along the way, I think that's the biggest gift we can give to our children, is not what we've done really well at and our successes, but our mistakes. And, hopefully they can learn from them, not relive them.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, because I'm a big fan of like learning from our mistakes, learning from other people's mistakes too. Like, I want to learn from other people's mistakes, what they did wrong, and their takeaways and things like that. And that's why I enjoy doing these podcasts, because I get to learn, I get to know people. But I've learned so much from my mistakes. And I've told people I've lost somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million as a franchisee and franchise organizations. But I'm better because of it. And I can help other people because of it now.
Right.
And so it's like, I made these mistakes. I hope people are learning from them. And I've certainly learned from them. So anytime you lose money, you lose something, you learn. But like, what are some of the mistakes that you've made, or some of the things that some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from some of those mistakes?
Yeah, the chapters in the book, there's 4 very, succinct things that I think are really important. One is finding your why. When I was 5 years old, I started my first business. I had 14 businesses before I was in high school. And so finding my why, I love building businesses. And it wasn't until I got to high school that my high school guidance counselor gave me the worst guidance that I think anyone could have given me at the time, which was, being an entrepreneur is not anything you can do now. This was, the mid 80s, and being an entrepreneur at that point was not a cool word. It was crazy uncle that lost all of his money twice. That was the definition of an entrepreneur. So she said, maybe someday you can own your own business, you can start your own business, but really you need to go to corporate America and, go to college, get a job, work your way up the ladder, and then maybe you can have enough experience to go start a job. So, I lost in high school my why, and ended up going to college, got an RTC scholarship, went in the Army, which was amazing leadership. There's not too many jobs you can get out of college where I was a platoon leader. I was leading 40 people right out of college. And the leadership lessons that I learned there, I think were really critical. But that was my path back. And then I got out and became an entrepreneur again. And I took a lot of those lessons from the military. But, just finding, your why, and it's okay not to be normal. We talk about, being extraordinary, which is really just ordinary. We want to be extraordinary. And this whole idea of, it's just human nature. We want to fit in, regression to the mean, regression to the average of everyone around you. And I was doing things, I remember I was 4, 5, 6 years old. My mom, really got me into arts and crafts. I'm very creative. I have a big imagination. So I love doing needlepoint, latch hook. She got me a sewing machine when I was 6 years old.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So, I just loved it. And, of course, back then, the only sewing machine for kids that was kid friendly, kid safe was the pink Holly Hobby sewing machine. So there I am with my sewing machine. The first thing my mom taught me how to sew was a pocketbook. She didn't call it a pocketbook, but it's basically taking 2 squares of material, doing a U shape around it, turning inside out, and putting some handles on it. So I was very proud of whatever it was she was calling it, but it was a pocketbook. And I went out to show my friends, and they didn't think it was nearly as cool as I did. So they made a lot of fun of me, and then I learned that if you take a fistful of rocks and put it in said pocketbook, turns into a pretty nice weapon in which to retaliate against those that are giving you a hard time.
Oh, that's great, man. That's great. It's true. Like back in the day, being an entrepreneur was not cool. It was like, it's cool today. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, but man, back then.
It was a lot harder back then. So, that's why I think fewer people did it. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with technology. So I remember I, incorporated my first business. I had to go to a lawyer. It was a big thing. It cost, $2,000, payroll, just technology and figuring out how to do all this stuff. It's a press of several buttons now to have your own business and get it going. And, the internet has a big part of that. How do you market? How do you get it out there? But back then, just things weren't available like they are now. So it was definitely a tougher grind to figure it out back then.
So you talk about embracing your fears in the book. What are some, like, obviously you've had some pretty crazy stuff happen in your life, but like, talk about fear. And most people, they don't get into entrepreneurship because they're fearful. Most people don't buy a franchise because of fear. They'll call it all kinds of other things, but usually it's fear why people don't move forward in buying a business and taking a risk or whatever it is. So like, what's your take on embracing your fears?
Yeah, I do some of this, what others would call crazy stuff. I think it's, relatively mitigate the risk. Of course, my accident gets thrown in my face quite a bit, and like, look what happened. But that failure is not nearly as difficult to swallow than I think a failing business. There's a lot of things that you can fail at that no one needs to know about. No one needs to know that you applied to Harvard and didn't get in, and that's why you're at whatever tier school that you're in. No one needs to know that didn't do well in your LSATs, and all these failures that you can sweep under the rug that no one needs to look at it. But failing in a business is extremely public. Everybody knows about it, and it's difficult. It's scary, and I think that's fear of failure is the big reason. But then you have fear of regret on the other side of it. What if you don't do it, and are you going to regret that? So I always look at fear of regret. I try to have that override my fear of failure. And if you get knocked down, you get back up again. Like you said, I've lost, I think I beat you by a long shot as far as how much money I've lost in different businesses that I've tried. Some have done, extremely well. Others were, just absolute disasters, but, they were spectacular disasters. I learned a lot from them, and I take those learnings. One of the businesses that I started, one of the first ones, it was an indoor air quality heating and air business. So we did, duct cleaning, we did indoor air quality, filtering of the air, and it was a $10,000 average sale. I learned how to do that. I had over $1 million, I think 1.3 million in sales my first year in business, and 37% net profit. So by all measures that we look at in a business, it was wildly successful. I was working 18 hours a day. So I thought that was what you're supposed to do. It isn't, by the way, it doesn't have to be that painful. It reminded me of in the military, 5 years into being in the Army, my feet just kept getting worse and worse. And I would go on long runs in the morning and put on my combat boots and start walking around, and I was hobbling. So finally I broke down, went to the Army podiatrist, and it took him about 1 minute to tell me what was wrong. He said, "You're a size 12 and you're wearing a size 10.5 combat boot." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not good." And he goes, "Isn't it really uncomfortable? Wasn't it uncomfortable all this time wearing the combat boots?" And I said, "I thought they were supposed to hurt. I thought combat boots were supposed to be really uncomfortable." And I think that's what a lot of people think when they start a business. It's supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be really painful. But when I went to sell that business, because I was a reserve officer at that point. I got off of active duty, and the Army sent me a note saying, "You're getting deployed in 6 to 9 months." So my business couldn't survive all of like 1 day without me, because I was the business. I tried to go on a vacation with my family, 6 to 9 months into it, and I was on the phone the whole time dealing with just stuff that you shouldn't have to deal with. But it's because I was the business. And so when I went to sell it, I'll let you guess this. I went to sell the business, and we were growing. We were on a hockey stick growth curve. So all those numbers, there's a lot of people interested in buying it. How much do you think? So we can look at it. There's EBITDA, there's profit. What multiple of profit do you think I got?
Probably 1 to 2.
Close. You're closer than most. I got 0. I got an earnout, because they looked at me and said, "We don't think this business is going to do very well without you. You were the head salesperson. I had a 76% close rate. My best salesperson after me had a 40% close rate." They're like, "If he ran all the appointments, you would have lost money." So, it was, and they were right. So they gave me an earnout starting 6 months later on profitability, and less than 6 months later, they're out of business. I got a note while I was deployed in the Middle East, business is gone. And that was really traumatic. That wasn't just a failure in business. That was something that I had built that was doing really well, that completely fell apart. So when I came back, I built a franchise brand, and I was really careful not to be in the business. And there's so many things that draw you into it, because you think you can, or at least you think you can do it better than everyone else. And if you're not building a team that's better than you, and that's hard to do, because you are the business, you're the most passionate about in the beginning. But if you're not building that team that's better than you, you're going to get stuck where I was stuck. So that was a critical lesson, because that's I talk in the book about reframing adversity. That adversity and all the things I've gone through, if I look back on it, what I learned from that and my takeaways from it made the next success, or the next failure less. And then you learn from that. And that's really, I think, I would attribute all my business success to all the failures that I've had.
So here's the deal with the Franchise Tribe Mastermind. It's full of a bunch of successful franchisees across many different industries, many different brands, and you get to be a part of that. Now, if you've had any level of success in franchising, you've probably been around top performing Z's in your current brand. So think about that. And if you could do that with 40 plus different brands, industries, franchisees, that's the value in the mastermind. I bring in some of the best speakers in the world. We talk about some topics that will never be talked about anywhere else. So if you're interested in being a part of a group like that, check out franchisetribe.com. So how quickly were you able to reframe and publicly kind of talk about that that business that you sold for, for nothing? Like, you didn't get anything out of that business. Like, was it a 6 months later or a year later? Like, when did you get comfortable being able to talk about a failure that you had?
It was pretty quick. I think, by the time we franchised, I was very comfortable talking about it. It was the thing I talked about at Discovery Days with candidates. And I basically say everything here that we built was built on failures. And that was, one of the stories I would go to is I was the business. And, for franchisees or anybody starting a business, if you're not building a team around you, or if you're building a subpar team, it's going to always be easy to go, they can't do it. Then you're letting them go, trying to bring someone in. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, for a lot of reasons, but I think a lot of it is just, wanting to look good and pride. They want to be the best. We're kind of hardwired from first grade on to be the best, especially now. And they want to be the best. So having others do things in their own company that are better than them, I think it's threatening. I think it's scary. And it's also hard to do.
What advice would you give franchisors out there that are in the beginning stages and they are wanting to bring on franchisees? I mean, you've done it before. You've built a big company, very successful. You're about ready to do it again. And, I'm sure you've learned things along the way of what kind of franchisee you're looking for and how to bring on the best franchisees. Allan, I talk to franchisors all the time. And I argue with them. They're like, man, I can sell so many. Why does the process have to be so long to sell to acquire a new franchisee? I'm like, you're thinking about this all wrong. Like, you don't want you don't want to sell them on the opportunity to try to get them in there to have another franchisee, to have 100 franchisees in 2 years or whatever it is, because they're bringing on the wrong people. They go through a 2-week discovery process from inquiry to signing. Like, I've talked to brands that want that. So what advice would you give to franchisors out there that want rapid growth and they don't know what they don't know?
Yeah, I think there's some things you touched on, but the most important thing, if you don't have this right, none of that other stuff matters. And I didn't come up with this. Dave Hood told me this, iFranchise Group, who we used as our group to franchise. And I asked him the same question, like, what's the number one reason that franchisors fail? And he said, lack of capital. And, that's true. If you have enough capital, you'll be successful. Now, it's the only thing that will take you out of the game. It's the only mistake that you'll make in business that'll take you out of the game. So being undercapitalized, and this goes for franchisees as well, and kind of goes to the point of who are you going to approve. If this is a big chunk of what they have, it's going to be really hard. It's not impossible. It's going to be really hard to, as a franchisor, make the right decisions. Turn that candidate down and stay away from, can they fog a mirror and write a check? Because no one says they want to do that, or no one says they do it. But if you're struggling for funds, you're going to approve the wrong people. And the same thing goes for the franchisees. What they end up doing is, we would approve people with, enough funding. It wasn't all the money they had, but even with what they had left, they would take X amount of dollars that they had, which is plenty of capital, and then they would mentally play with a much smaller amount of that. So it's like sitting down at a blackjack table and you've got, $1,000, but you're playing in your mind with 100. And you're going to make really bad decisions based on that. And then if you lose that, the next chunk of money mentally you're playing with, you're going to lose that. So be properly capitalized, and then use that capital to, make mistakes and recover from them, but also make hard decisions that most people don't want to make. And that includes, not approving franchisees that in your gut aren't going to make it. And that's really hard, especially if you're in the consultants and working with brokers. If you're in those networks, they do not like hearing their candidate is not a good fit, especially at the end of the process. So the sooner you can do that, the better. And I think having whoever's doing your franchise development, making sure they understand. It's really training your franchise development folks. And sometimes, they had to learn the hard way with me. They would bring people to Discovery Day, which is where I was typically meeting them. I'm like, this is not a good fit. And they learned the hard way, but they knew. And the other thing that I had all my franchise development folks do is make sure they know when they come to Discovery Day that can, and we had really good validation, and we had people showing up going, you know, I've talked to 5 people, 10 people, and they're loving it. This is great. I'm like, who did you talk to that's struggling? And they just look at me like deer in the headlights, like no one. I'm like, before we award you a franchise, you need to find people. Can't tell you who they are. You just got to call around, but there are people out there. There's always the bottom 20% of the system. Doesn't mean they're necessarily failing, but they're struggling. And if you don't talk to them and find out why, and if you can't tell me why they're struggling, then I'm not going to approve you as a franchisee. And the answer to that question, by the way, I wouldn't tell them the answer, but the answer always needed to be they're not following the system. And they need to know enough about the system through the validation, through all the different steps they've gone through in the process to understand when that franchisee was challenged. And they would end up interviewing the franchisee, you know, like, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And they were bought into the system if they went through that process. But it's surprising how few franchisees, you know, it's like, great, they didn't talk to anybody that's struggling. Worst thing you can do is have them go into a franchise system thinking that there are no struggles, and that, you know, more importantly, if you don't follow the system, you will not do well. This is a proven model. You can't fight against it. And it's shocking. You've seen it. How many people buy franchises because there's a system, and how many of those, you know, don't follow it? They, you know, I always tell people, you didn't buy Burger King. This, you know, it's not doing it your way. There's a reason why you're buying this franchise, and follow the system, follow it blindly. There's always room for improvement. So we were really lucky. We had great franchisees with great ideas, but, you know, we would filter those ideas. We would do small tests on those ideas to make sure they work. So that's really how we innovated. All our ideas came from the field, but franchisees just weren't going on their own and testing it. Typically, we would test those things in our corporate markets before we let our franchisees around any sharp edges.
I love it. Such good advice. I love how you ask them, like, did you talk to somebody that was struggling? No? Okay, go talk to more to find out why they're struggling, and they got to come back to you with the answer.
Yeah.
I love that. All right. Peers, like you're a learner, you like to learn things, you like to grow. You're part of organizations like YPO. You know, why are those types of groups, the importance of being around the right peers, important to you?
Yeah, YPO has been great. You know, Young Presidents Organization, EO, is another group that really is the foundation of those organizations are built on a pursuit of lifelong learning. And you've got people running $20 million companies, billion-dollar companies. I went to a Harvard Business School YPO event for a week, and in my small group, there's 8 of us. It was me and one other guy that were not running billion-dollar companies. And, you know, but they were all there to learn. They're all there to get better. And it's really hard to find people that are that committed to continually getting better. A lot of people just land in a spot. You know, I liken it to salespeople. You know, you hire salespeople and all of them want to make, you know, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, but there's some number that they are truly comfortable with. They may not admit it to themselves, but they're comfortable with. And when they get there, they stop. And I think that's true for everybody as they're going through their journey. It's difficult, you know, finding that point where you're comfortable, where things are going pretty good, where you just slow down and go, I don't need to get better anymore. And there's so many people out there like that, avoiding them. And also, you know, sometimes you meet people who are growing with you and then they just get to that point, they stop growing. You know, how do you eject your friends? And
ooh, talk about that.
Yeah, it's really easy to do once you get the hang of it. You know, we're talking about IFAs coming up. I stopped drinking, so I started drinking pretty heavily. Being a franchisor is stressful, and you know, in my book I talk about there's a number of factors, but the main one was I was diagnosed ADD, so I was put on Adderall when I moved to Atlanta. My doctor's like, hey, you know, you ADD, do you take anything for it? I'm like, not really. He goes, well, try Adderall. Let me know how it goes. And I tried Adderall. I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm getting more done in 1 hour than I have probably in a week, mostly. So I thought it was great. The problem was over the next 2 years, I started drinking more and more and more. One, you know, the stress of business, it's easy to do. But the fact of the matter was I was doing uppers and downers. I didn't know it, but I stopped drinking, got a lot healthier, lost a lot of weight, got in, fitness, eating clean. 6 months later, after I, got better from drinking. And by the way, the catalyst for me to stop drinking was I did everything with my son when he was growing up. Had an only child. We would do everything together. And one day he asked me to go swimming at 6 a.m. because he was training for pentathlon. He's like, "Dad, you want to go?" My answer was always yes, except I had to say no, or I was about to say no because I could get up at 6 a.m, but the amount I was drinking every single night, I couldn't swim 2,000 meters at 6 a.m. So that's the day I stopped drinking. 6 months later, I'm healthy. And then I couldn't sleep. I went 4 days without sleeping. I was literally hallucinating. Went to my doctor. He said, "You need to see a psychiatrist." And I was pretty quickly diagnosed with bipolar 2, which isn't the kind of thing that puts you in the hospital. There's a lot of bipolar is misdiagnosed as ADD, especially bipolar 2. So I stopped drinking, went through the whole process, and I was at the IFA about a year later. And, I just noticed, and this is when, I joined YPO and just really started getting back on that track of lifelong learning. And I met one of those dinner parties. I think it was one of the law firms, and there was like 12 people were sitting at a table. We just had this long dinner. It's about 9 o'clock. We're in Vegas, and everybody's like, "Where are we going to go out?" And I said, "I'm not going. I'm going back to my room. I'm going to wake up in the morning, go running." And they were giving me a hard time. And I just looked at them and I said, there's very few people that I will stay up past like 10 o'clock with, and none of you are it. And, I was friendly with them, and I said, you can use humor a lot to deliver messages, but, I really meant it. And, there's not a lot of reason to go out, staying out late, drinking all, for me, at least at that point. I just learned that not a lot of good comes out of it. You wake up the next day, you feel horrible. You're not engaged. So that's one example of how, those people that, a year ago, 2 years ago, when I was drinking a lot, have been like, "Yeah, let's, giddy up, let's go. Where are we going?" And, staying out all night. So, that's a group of friends that, and they weren't great friends. None of these folks that we're talking about are truly, connected, deep friendships. It's all surface level, and it's built on something that probably, if you're learning and growing, isn't important to you anymore.
That is good. I was on this like traveling circuit. This was like probably 4 years ago, traveling, like going to different masterminds, franchising stuff, entrepreneurial stuff, marketing stuff. And then a friend said, "Hey, want to do 75 hard with me, Eric?" I said, "Sure. What is it?"
Yeah, just say yes.
That's I said yes. And, most people know what 75 hard is now, like no drinking, no sugar, exercise twice a day. And I'm like, this will be great. This will be good discipline. Because I'm getting ready to go on the road. And it was hard doing that. I'd wake up at 4 o'clock to get my first workout in because I knew I landed. Anyway, but then I started to meet people in the gym. I would go there when there's a party going on, and I'm meeting people in the gym that are like speakers at these events, or they are important people that I really want to know or learn something from, or somebody that I didn't know was important. Now we became friends. And so once you stop drinking or whatever it is, staying up super late, there's a whole other subset of people that are at the gym early in the morning. They are at the gym when people are at the bar. They, or you recognize that not everybody is drinking, and they have all kinds of different reasons for it. It doesn't matter what they are, but it's there was a lot more people that don't drink at these events than I realized before I was on 75 hard.
Yeah, just grab a club soda and lime. No one knows the difference. And, I didn't really care if people, it wasn't something I brought up, because I think that's the hardest part about not drinking is when someone says, "Why aren't you drinking?" How do you deliver that message without sounding judgmental? Because I didn't care if other people drank. I just didn't want to. But one of the things I realized when I stopped drinking was a lot of the places that I was going, the reason I was drinking is I was bored and I didn't want to be there. And so that's why I was drinking. And so there's a lot of things that I just stopped doing because I really didn't want to do it. Drinking was just the way to get through it.
Attention franchisors, if you are not bringing in Many of the right franchisees, sales are slow. It's stealing too much of your time as a founder trying to award franchises to the right franchisee. There's a better way to do it. That's why I started the Franchise Sales Mentor. If you want to have access to the information, the techniques, the ways that the best franchise sales organizations are awarding franchisees, then you might want to check out the Franchise Sales Mentor. The reasons that franchisors join is because they want access. They want access to my Rolodex. They want access to my connections. They want access to shortcut both short-term and long-term success to increase enterprise value to their brand. I do it just to do it. I still drink, but I don't care about alcohol. Like, take it or leave it. I don't care. Now give me a good chocolate chip cookie or a cake or dessert. Like, that's my temptation. Alcohol, doesn't matter. But sugar, I love some good sugar. Well, I love how you talk about ejecting friends. All right, what else do we want to talk about? Like, we got a number of the things that we could, let's talk about moving with velocity. Let's finish with that.
Yeah. So I remember we had started Shelf Genie and we're about a year into it. And, it was messy. One of my favorite definitions of being an entrepreneur is jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down. And that's what we were doing. We were building it as we went. And that's why I'm excited about launching this new franchise. Is we've spent 3 years getting ready to franchise, because I don't want to go through that again. But if you've never gone through it, you don't know what you don't know. And one of my partners, who was still working the business at the time, we were going through one of these like crazy things, and he made, the comment. He goes, we're moving so fast. It just feels like the parts on the plane are only staying on because we're going so fast. And I said, exactly. I'm like, if we slow down, literally just things are going to fall off. So moving fast, that's what's exciting. You slow down, it's the grow or die mentality. But most people, don't move fast, and velocity is different than speed. Velocity is speed and direction. So moving fast and not knowing where you're going, you're clearly not going to get there, but you're going to zigzag and not have a destination. More importantly, people aren't going to get behind a vision because you don't have one. So I think establishing a really clear vision for your team, and if you're a franchisor, for your franchisees and for them, where are we going? What do we want this to look like in 3 years, in 5 years? What does winning look like? And if we're going to go to the Super Bowl and win the championship or the World Series, this is what, that end state looks like. And this is what we have to do to get there. But if you're not moving quickly, one, it's just not exciting, but two, someone's going to beat you there, or you're not going to get there because you're just going to slow down and fatigue. It's almost like the NAD therapy that I told you about, where it's just, you feel horrible as you're going through it. And again, it doesn't have to be painful, but if it is, the faster you get there, the better. And then it's over with. But people get excited about growth. But if you're not moving with velocity, you can lose steam. And I think for franchisors, the first 10 to 20 franchisees is really critical. And if you don't get them quickly, you're not building that community. You're rolling the dice on validation, because you're going to have some people, just like when you hire employees, that aren't going to work out. But if you're not moving with velocity, you're not going to get there quickly. And you can get stuck, and then the system can implode on itself.
What did you not put in the book that you wish you would have?
That's a tough question, because I just finished it. So I went through, it took me 5 years to write it. So I did have to stop reading books for the last year, because every time I was reading stuff, I get ideas and want to put more in the book. But the things I didn't put in the book that I actually wrote in a letter to my son. So I talked about the book's a letter, but he went in the military. So he left, right after high school and joined the National Guard. So he was gone for 6 months. I got to talk to him maybe every Sunday for an hour, couldn't FaceTime. So I really went from this super connected relationship to him going off to become an adult very, very quickly. He came back and went to college, but that was really tough for me. So I spent probably about 3 or 4 months at least writing this letter to him, handwritten, 4-page letter. And there's 4 things that I talked about with him, and a lot of those themes in the book. But the first thing is life is a game. And I think if we treat it like a game, it's a lot more fun. And I'm a huge fan of gamification. Just making it fun. We all love to play games. Don't try to be perfect. I think that's one of the things that's put in our heads from an early age is don't fail. Try to be perfect. Protecting your mind, which is surround yourself by people that want to learn and grow, and not hanging around people that don't. And then, the final thing that I told him was not to compare himself to others. It's so easy to do, but when you compare yourself to others, it's that whole idea of, Facebook and social media causes a lot of depression because you're only seeing the best of people. You're not seeing that big argument they had with their family or their spouse right before the photo was taken, or right after the photo was taken, or all the things that are happening negative in life. You're just bombarded with, perfect life. And when you do that, it really causes depression. It sucks. It's unmotivating. It sucks the joy out of what you're doing. So those are the 4 things I told him. That some of those themes are in the book, but did not make it in the book because the letter actually did, but they didn't make it into the overall book.
I love it, man. I love it. All right. Well, I can't wait to get you on when you're ready to talk about your new brand. So congrats on the book. Everyone should go check it out. Disruptible, Break Away from Ordinary. Check it out. It's a great book. Allan, we'll get you on in probably the next couple months to talk about brand number 2. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.